Most authorities agree that a fine violin doesn't become truly beautiful until it has enough wear to expose its true character and some of the glorious golden varnish underneath. And one of the most important factors in achieving the correct look on any violin is the touch-up varnish. And as promised, this video shows how to make this wonderful, almost magical solution from start to finish. The first step is obtaining the correct raw materials. And for almost 40 years, the best supplier of the ingredients for touch-up varnish is Woodfinishing Enterprises. And I have included their contact information in the description below this video. I've used this Harvard trip balance my entire life, yet any scale with an accuracy of 1/10 of a gram should work fine. This is the recipe, though the Venetian turpentine and Elemi can be reduced by about 25% if you want a harder final French polish. But this is the best recipe for going into the raw wood and retaining the tone of an instrument. The amount of alcohol varies because it takes about 60 grams of alcohol to dissolve the Elemi properly, and old shellac can take up to 100 grams of alcohol to dissolve it in a reasonable amount of time. I've had this shellac about 6 years, so I'm going to use between 65 and 70 grams of alcohol. Sometimes there can be a few clumps, but if you keep moisture out and the lid on, it should pour out nicely. Some of the old recipes are confusing because it takes a lot more alcohol to dissolve the ingredients in the beginning than the varnish has to have when it's finished, and we'll cover that later. And yes, once again, if I seem a little awkward for someone who's been doing this their entire life, I don't know if I'll ever totally get used to doing everything through a tiny GoPro screen that goes almost black after 1 minute. I use a screwdriver and a nitrile glove because Venetian turpentine is so tough to dig out, and it's really, really sticky. So I set the scale up for the 2 grams and start digging. As long as you get the Venetian turpentine anywhere in the bottle, the alcohol will dissolve it down into the solution. I hope that everyone appreciates these videos because I have no depth of perception at all while wearing this GoPro in front of my face. Yet it's the only way I have to give the correct perspective of the things that I do. Now that I have the correct weight, I now wipe everything I reasonably can off of the screwdriver. And I usually smear the rest of it off with the nitrile glove and throw it away. This bottle of Elemi is about 35 years old and almost empty, so I probably better show you what a newer bottle looks like inside. Yes, it always looks kind of grimy and terrible, but it does do the job correctly. It's not nearly as sticky as the Venetian turpentine, so when it's this old, I break it apart with my bare fingers. The combination of Venetian turpentine and Elemi, which are both considered plasticizing resins, keep the varnish tough, yet still flexible for the best possible sound and durability. Now for the alcohol. And it looks like I'll have to refill my flask before we're done. My shop used to be strewn with bottles of Everclear, yet after a lot of testing, this Startex and a couple other high-quality brands of denatured alcohol really do work just as good at 1/10 of the price. So I set the balance for 60 grams, and I pour in a little extra because the shellac is a little on the old side. I stir it up a little and play with it, and as you can see, the Venetian turpentine that stuck to the wall dissolves very quickly. Then everything needs to dissolve overnight at room temperature. I just put it on the hot plate out of habit and to remind myself about it in the morning. Yes, I have beakers and flasks, but I love these baby bottles more than anything when it comes to varnish making. And this is pretty typical, with the Venetian turpentine totally dissolved, the shellac mostly dissolved with mushy remnants in the bottom, and a chunk or two of Elemi that are really soft and just need broken up a little better. On this chipped up Hamilton Beach hot plate, the perfect setting is just barely above the number 1 out of 7. But the hot plate and the temperature aren't that critical. Just adjust whatever you have to a low temperature just below the true boiling temperature, so that little bubbles stream up from the tiny remnants of the Elemi. And after we're sure that everything is dissolved at this temperature, other than the tiny dark impurities of the Elemi, we turn the temperature up ever so slightly and evaporate off about 1/2 of the alcohol. Keep an eye on everything and keep the boiling very mild so you don't damage the quality of the varnish, also to keep it from boiling over and possibly starting a fire. Once you believe you're getting close, start weighing the varnish and take it down to a total weight of 30 grams or less, depending upon how thick you would like it to be. If in doubt, lean toward the 24 grams because it's quicker and easier to thin the varnish than thicken it later on. Once it's down to weight, let it cool and settle overnight with the lid on. When it comes to filtering varnish, these Carpenter's dust masks are perfect. And once again, I have very nice labware, but I like this simple stand made out of welding rod even better. This is very typical of the residue you should expect to find, or possibly a little bit more sometimes. But if the solution is nice and clear and looks something like this, you now have uncolored touch-up varnish, and it's always good to keep a little bit around. These wood-fast colors really are quite wonderful, and as far as I know, they pretty much last forever. But be prepared because everyone's definition of a particular color or blend of colors might not be the same. And as with all colors that I have ever found around the world, especially natural occurring ones, they will vary a little from batch to batch. But just so you know approximately what to expect, here is the lineup in straight alcohol. The beauty of these is that they dissolve in just a few minutes, and you can add any amount you wish. So if it isn't really red, put in a little bit more until it turns red. You don't need an analytical balance, but just for the record, a nice average amount of color is around 0.006 grams, or 6 milligrams for each 6 grams of varnish. Yet, once anyone actually begins working with these colors, the amounts always end up being touchy-feely and dependent upon their individual techniques. And yes, once again, I do have very elaborate lab equipment and supplies, which I will get to in other videos. But I still prefer flat toothpicks or these tiny tapered flat scoops cut out of 100-pound cardstock with scissors. And I throw each one away after using it so I don't contaminate the next color. As with all powdered colors, be extremely careful not to spill it or breathe any of the dust. And hopefully these 2 examples that I weighed will help get you started. So I'll place approximately 6 milligrams of colorant into a small baby bottle. Then add 6 to 8 drops of alcohol, and you can see how fast it dissolves, and swish it around for half a minute or so, and sometimes this is all it takes. Other times you may need to stir it a bit with a glass stirring rod, and then let it sit for a while and mix it again. The important part is making sure that all of the colorant is completely dissolved. This GoPro really gets in the way sometimes. As you can see, the color blends into the varnish very quickly, and it looks nice. When you first get these squeeze bottles, make sure that the tip is pressed in tight, or you can have a real mess later on. They're also removable later on, and you can snap them back in anytime. Then I squeeze the bottle, put the tip in the varnish, and suck it all up. And voila, our first color of touch-up varnish. Even though there are only a few colors available, there are no limits to how we mix the colors together. And walnut and red is a very commonly used combination of colors. Some people put the alcohol in first, but with this colorant, unlike all the other colors and varnishes that I've ever worked with, it's pretty much anything goes. Whatever tickles your fancy and makes you feel good in the end, because they seem to dissolve no matter what you do. You can also add one color to the other after it's dissolved in the alcohol to help you get the color just right before adding it to the varnish. Or, to further break the standard rules of mixing, you can even add more dry powder to previously colored varnish, as long as you mix it well enough, let it sit for an hour or two, and then mix it again. If you later decide that the varnish is too thin, you can always put it back on the hot plate and turn it on very low to thicken it up. but watch everything very closely because it usually gets thick quick, and it gets even thicker when it cools down again. And with experience, we are now ready to touch up and French polish a fine violin.